I'm excited to be here. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Bert Salazar, and I am the host for this brand new Facebook Live retirement show. And obviously, I do a lot of videos, educational videos on retirement and tax planning, which I put on Facebook and YouTube and so forth. And you always have the opportunity to go on those channels and be able to take a look at the stuff that I put out. Some of the videos that I do are anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes. Some of them are a little longer, like 10, 11 minutes and so forth. And then I also do webinars. And usually the type of webinars that I do are webinars that are primarily geared toward retirement. That's my specialty. I'm a retirement strategist and a tax planner. So any questions that you may have in the future regarding retirement and or tax planning, feel free to reach out to me at any point in time. For those of you that know who I am, obviously I've been in the industry for 30 years, so you guys know that. But for those of you that don't know, I have been in the financial services industry for over 30 years, but you know, a lot of stuff is happening. About 3 years ago, I decided to go and actually become virtual and remote. I very seldom see any clients anymore. Most of the client engagement that I do is through video conferences, as I'm doing with all of you today. So, you know, I've been thinking about doing a Facebook show for some time. And, you know, life happens, so you get pretty busy. Obviously, I'm very busy because I do a monthly seminar, educational seminar on retirement at Florida International University. I also do a weekly podcast, and I've done, I think, 103 podcasts. So if you're interested in learning more about the podcasts that I put out, feel free to go on your podcast channel. If you have an iPhone, you should have an app, which is for a podcast, and then you can search for Your Tax-Free Life podcast, which is the one that I've been doing now for 2 years. And that podcast, I provide a tremendous amount of information, but most important, I provide a lot of education. And the reason for that is that information without education always leads to failure. So I do podcasting, I do webcasts, I do webinars, I do videos. So I'm always giving a lot of knowledge to all of you out there because it's important for me to give something back to the community, not only to my clients, but also to the many other followers that I have on all of these different channels that are always following me. Now, you would wonder, why am I doing today a Facebook Live channel for Facebook? And just so you'll know, I'm going to start doing these every Wednesday at noon. So you can put on your calendar. I'll send you a notice before then. But this is something I'm going to start doing. Now, obviously, I have so many topics. I have pages and pages and pages of topics that we can discuss from a retirement standpoint. But I'm going to start doing these on Wednesdays. And then, you know, once we get the hang of doing these on an ongoing basis, and I want to start doing them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But for now, it will be on Wednesday mornings. Now, you would wonder, why this show now? Well, I think I wrote a bunch of notes here. You know, there are way too many questions and not enough time. You know, over the last 3 weeks, I normally get anywhere between 12 and 15 phone calls a day. And all the questions are about, you know, retirement accounts and what's happening with the coronavirus and the impact that that is having on your financial planning, on your retirement planning, on all those goals and objectives that many of you have set up, that all of a sudden now you see them trickling down to almost nothing. So I've been getting a lot of tax questions, retirement questions, you know, how to protect your retirement assets. So the first show for today is going to be an overview of a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be covering. Now, obviously, I cannot give you the entire overview because otherwise it would take us about an hour to be able to do so. But I'm going to kind of go through some of the major areas that I think will be important for you to get a feel from regarding what we're going to be covering today. I did a couple of weeks ago, I did a short video that I named "Even a Broken Clock is right twice a day." Even a broken clock is right twice a day. And whenever I put out a video, I like to make it fun. So I like to use titles that, will kind of get you thinking and, hopefully thinking outside of the box. But this one that I did is called "Even a Broken Clock is Right Twice a Day." And the reason is that the vast majority of people that I'm talking to right now, the vast majority of you actually watching this live show today, or if you're going to watch the recorded version later on, most of you have been living in a make-believe world, because since 1999 through 2019, the end of 2019, actually, I would even argue the very beginning of 2020, we have had the longest bull market in American history. And all of us, as human beings, we have a tendency to forget, the bad things in life. So most of you forgot about 2001, 2003, 2008, and in many different ways, you really truly thought that this bull market was going to last at least for the rest of your life. But those are not things that happen often. And all of a sudden, you're waking up to see, what is happening today. Just to give you an idea of how bear markets work, and then we'll go into this bear market. If I take a look at the S&P 500, if you take a look at the S&P 500, and if you go back to, let's say, 1929 through 2009, which was the last time that we actually had a bear market up until the 2020 financial virus, as I call it, bear market. You'll notice that bear markets normally take place every 5.1 years, so a little over every 5 years, you're going to have a bear market. Now, this bull market that we've gone through actually lasted north of 10 years. But for the most part, bear markets last about they happen every 5.1 years. The average loss in a bear market is around 39%, give or take a percentage point. They normally last about a year and a half. And it takes about just north of 5 years for Americans to recover all the losses that they sustained during that bear market. So you really need to start thinking about that very carefully, because as you start to look toward the future, as you get closer and closer and closer to retirement, you cannot afford major losses in your retirement accounts. I would argue that if you're 30, 35, 40 years of age, and you have 20, 25, 30 years to retirement, yeah, something like this happens, you can kind of wait it out. But when you're 55, 60, 65, or you're already in retirement, major losses can create havoc, and they can actually destroy your retirement life. And I did another video that talked about the fact that your retirement life is not going to look anywhere near what you thought it would be, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. But let me give you one example that I think you'll find very critical. If you look at the bear market, think of it this way. If you have a 40% loss on a given year, it takes a 67% rate of return just to get back to where you were at in 1 year. Now, I have never seen the stock market do 67% on any given year. But let's say that you had a 40% market loss, and you'll say, okay, Bert, if I'm getting an 8% rate of return after a 40% market loss, how long is it going to take for me to be able to recover that 40% loss that I suffered in that year? Well, if you're getting a constant 8% rate of return, it's going to take you 6.6 years, 6.5 years pretty much, for you to recover the losses that you suffered in that first year. But that's not the entire story, because inflation never stops. So while you're trying to recapture all those losses that you sustained in 1 year, it's going to take you another 6.6 years just to recover that number. But it doesn't include inflation. It doesn't include taxation. It doesn't include that whether you're getting that 8% rate of return, what if you have one of those years where there's another loss? Then that's going to set you back. Most important, what if you have to take money out of your retirement accounts at the worst possible time, at a time where your assets are heading south because you suffered a tremendous loss, a 40% loss, like in this example, but you still need to dip into those retirement accounts on a monthly basis in order to maintain your standard of living? Well, there's a very, very high probability that you're never going to recover. So protecting your downside as you get closer and closer to retirement is even more paramount than trying to get a higher rate of return in the future. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to share with you some numbers that are just going to kind of make you think. Hopefully, they're going to kind of make you think from that perspective. But those are things that are important to note. The other thing is that if you look at the market overall, and I have done some calculations, think of it this way. The bear market that we're going through right now because of the coronavirus, and I'm hoping that all of you are using this time to really think outside of the box, because most Americans don't have the ability to think outside of the box. But think of it this way. If you, in this bear market that we're going through right now, if you were to really think about what it's going to take for you to recover from all those losses, I have some very interesting numbers and calculations that I went back and did just to give you a little bit of flavor for you to think about. So for instance, the Dow Jones closed in 1999, closed at 10,000 for the first time in history. So now we're about 21,000 in the Dow today. It just yesterday went up by 2,000 points. Today it's up a little bit because they have approved, or they're in the process of approving this bailout, you know, for all the companies and Americans and so forth. But I did these calculations last week when the Dow Jones was at 183, I think it was that day. So I went back to 1999 through where we're at today. So that's a 20-year period. The Dow closed in 1999 at 10,000. And then when I fast forward 20 years and I go to the market at 23,185, the average rate of return for the market over that 20-year period was 4.29%. Now, think of it this way. I have just gone through a 20-year period in which there was a 10-year period from 2009 through 2019, where the Dow had the longest bull market in American history. And yet, the average rate of return was about 4.3%. Now, does that make any sense to you? The fact that you're taking a tremendous amount of risk in order to get a 4.3% rate of return when it's all said and done? The other calculation that I did was right before we went into the coronavirus bear market, the market actually had done fairly well. It was north of 29,000. Actually, the market was at 29,343 in the day that I did that calculation. So if I go back to 1999, where the market closed for the first time at 10,000, and I fast forward those 20 years to 29,343, the market actually did 5.5%. So in that 20-year period, at the very peak of the market, at the best possible time in the market did 5.5%. And if I actually go back in history to 1900, which was the first time that we actually started keeping track of the Dow Jones, in 1900, the Dow closed at 65 for the first time in history. And then if I go to where the market was a couple of weeks ago at the 23,185, and that would be 119-year history, the average of the market was 5.06%. So what I'm trying to tell you from all of this is that I don't care how well the market does or how bad the market does. Over the long term, the market is going to do anywhere between 4.5 and 5% on the average. Now, let me also give you something else for you to ponder on. Now, we have had a tremendous bear market in a period of actually 3 weeks. So in the last 3 weeks, all the gains that you had at the very beginning of 2020 were totally wiped out. All the gains that you had during 2019, totally wiped out. All the gains that you had through 2018, totally wiped out. And all the gains that you had in 2017, totally wiped out. So if you have your assets, your retirement assets in accounts where a 3-week bear market can destroy 3 years of the best gains historically in the history of our country, I would argue you really don't have a retirement plan. You have a hope plan, and hope is definitely not a financial strategy from a business standpoint. So because of the fact that I've been getting so many phone calls from so many of you, not only clients, now my clients, have done other stuff that, they've been able to protect their retirement assets, and we'll talk through those as we move forward. But many of you that are following me on YouTube and Facebook and on all these channels and podcasts and webinars that I do are reaching out because your financial advisors are not reaching out to you. And they should be. Now, they're not reaching out to you because they're petrified to talk to you, because they think that you're going to be very upset at them and say, hey, why haven't you called me? Why haven't you, protected my retirement downfall? Why haven't you do this? Why haven't you done that? So, they're staying away from you instead of being proactive with each and every one of you, which is what you pay for. And that's what you should be able to get from a business perspective. I also want to talk a little bit about the importance of understanding the Fatal Four. And the Fatal Four is a concept that I use with all my clients and that I promote through all of these channels that I bring information and education to all of you, that basically says that if you're able to protect and plan for the Fatal Four in retirement, your retirement life is going to be much, much better than if you don't do anything about it. Now, what are the Fatal Four that all of you should be protecting yourselves and your family as well? Well, the first one is the risk of dying too soon. So if you have a premature death, and again, we'll go into details as we do this show on a weekly basis. If you have a premature death, what is the financial impact to your family and to your heirs? Are they going to have enough to make it through retirement? Most of us buy life insurance for 2 reasons and 2 reasons only. You either love someone or you owe someone. But as you get older, you want to protect those that are around you. So, making certain that you protect your retirement assets and the people that you love the very most in your life, in case that you have a premature death, is very, very important. And there are many, many different ways that you can accomplish that. And we'll talk as time goes on through some of those issues and some of the options that you may have along the way. The second risk that is very critical to protect against is not the risk of dying too soon, is the risk of living too long. I would argue that most of us, if you're healthy, we're all going to live a long life. Now, the risk of living too long presents itself with major other challenges that you need to deal with. Number one is, are you going to run out of money before you run out of life? Are you going to get to a point in your mid-80s where you may have to become a Walmart greeter? Is that something that you want to do? And what are you doing today? Now, if you had just lost 15, 20, 25, 30, 40, 50% in this bear market, if your 401k just became a 201k overnight in a period of 3 weeks, then you're more than likely going to run out of money before you run out of life. And then what are you going to do? Do you think you're going to be able to live just on Social Security benefits? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you have there? What are some of the accounts that you can set up to make certain that you never, ever, ever run out of money before you run out of life? The third risk that is very critical to protect has nothing to do with dying too soon or living too long, but it has to do with living with a disability. So it's fairly tied to the risk of living too long, because the longer we live and the longer you live, the more stuff that's going to happen to you. And one of the major challenges that most Americans are going to have to deal with in the future is the risk of living with a disability like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, many of those things that none of us and none of you have ever planned for from a financial standpoint. As a matter of fact, if you're married and you're 65, both of you are 65 years of age, and both of you are fairly healthy, there's a 70% probability that one of you is going to have a need for long-term care at some point in time in the future. And the financial impact of long-term care can be devastating not only to you, but most important, to your family. Who's going to provide the care? Where's the care going to be provided depending on your needs? What is going to be the cost of care? The cost of long-term care in the United States is increasing by approximately 7.5% to 8%, almost 3 times the rate of inflation, and the cost is increasing every year thereafter. So how do you plan for that? Are you going to have enough assets set aside to be able to do that? Now, most of you are not going to qualify for Medicaid because you would have to be a financial failure in order to qualify for Medicaid, but what do you do in between? And then the last of the fatal 4 has nothing to do with dying too soon, living too long, or living with a disability, but it has to do with the risk of living with eroding factors. And for me, the definition of an eroding factor is anything that can erode the value of your retirement dollars as you go through your retirement life. What does that mean? Well, taxes, inflation, stock market volatility is what you're seeing today and we're all seeing today. Interest rate volatility, propensity to consume. Life happens. You own a piece of property, you have to replace a roof, you have to do, you have to replace furniture. All of those things are going to erode the value of your dollars in retirement. Again, we're going to be spending quite a bit of time going through this, because my number one goal for each and every one of you listening to me today is to provide you with education and to provide you with the tools that will assist you in mitigating all of these issues that you're all dealing through today. Another point that I want to go through is that, only when the tide goes down will you know who is swimming naked. And, I hear this from many of you. Well, Bert, I've been doing really well in the market over the last 10 years. Well, I would argue that a monkey, could have done very well in this market over the last 10 years because the market just kept getting north, going north, north, and north. But again, only when the tide goes down will you know who is swimming naked. So all of a sudden you're going through a bear market, the tide is going down. You decided to play this football game and you put all your emphasis on the offense and not the defense, because you never thought that there was going to be a bear market. And all of a sudden, your offensive team that you spend a lot of money building and investing into, all of a sudden they fumble the ball. And now the other team recover the fumble, and now it's your turn to play defense. And guess what? You don't have a defensive team. So all of a sudden you cannot stop the run, you cannot stop the pass, and you cannot stop the scores. And the reason for that is that you never thought that the tide was going down, but now once the tide did go down, now you're finding yourself that you're swimming all naked and everybody else is looking at you because you're totally naked in this financial world. So it is very important that if you want to win the Super Bowl of retirement and the Super Bowl of financial life, as I call it, I like to use analogies. is that you need to have a strong offense, but you need to have a stronger defense. See, when it comes to football games, the offense puts people on the stands, but defense actually win Super Bowls. So you need to have a balancing act between your offense and your defense. The challenge is that all of a sudden you've lost 40, 50% of your money with this bear market in a matter of 3 weeks, and you don't know what to do. Now, I know exactly what some of you have already done, because some of you have told me. You say, Bert, you know, the market has taken a beating. I can't deal with this anymore. So I went ahead and sold everything and went to cash. Good for you. At least you're stopping the bleeding. But now the question to all of you is, well, when do you get back in? Do you get back in? Because now you feel very uncomfortable. You don't know. You have jitters. You don't know. You know, I know the market went up yesterday, but is it going to go up tomorrow? Or is this going to be just going up 1 or 2 days, and then we're going to have another 2 or 3 days of down market? So now you start to questioning yourself, and you really don't know when to get back in. And I think the challenge for all of you is you'll never know. So now, do you get back in when the market has recovered 10%, 15%, 20%, 30%? Some of you may be so afraid to get back in that you're not going to do that, and that's probably the worst thing that you can do. So you need to start taking a look at your assets and where they are positioned and see how you can mitigate all of these losses or create the type of financial parachute that when you jump out of that retirement airplane, it doesn't matter what altitude you jump from, whether you needed oxygen or not. You know, if you were doing a halo jump, as we used to call in the Marine Corps, high altitude, low opening, what the wind velocity may be. Because if you have the proper tools in place, your landing will always be a safe landing from a retirement standpoint. But you need to have a strong offense, but you also need to have a very strong defense, you know, from a business perspective. Now, the question that many of you may ask now is, well, Bert, where do we go from here? You know, what if I want to fix all this mess that I'm in? How am I going to do that? Well, there are a number of ways that you can do that. Number one, you need to talk to someone that is going to have the ability to look at your finances, not only through a microscope, but also through a telescope. Because the challenge with most Americans, and I would argue the challenge for many of you, is that every single financial decision that you have made one at a time with different people under different sets of circumstances and with no telescopic view as part of your decision-making process. So no wonder your financial life may be all over the place, because you're looking at your financial decisions through a microscope and you fail to realize that when you make a financial decision on one side of the ledger, it may have either a positive or a negative impact on the other side. But unless you look at your financial world through a telescope, it's going to be almost impossible for you to determine whether you've made the right decision today for the right reasons and at the right time and for the long term as well. So what are some of the things that you need to do? Number one, if you have a bunch of holes in your boat, in your financial boat, first thing you got to do is you got to plug the holes. So I don't know what you're doing with your retirement accounts, but you need to plug the hole and do it as quickly as possible. The second thing you need to do is, well, now you got to take a look at all your retirement assets, put them in perspective, look at them through a telescope, find out what type of accounts do you have, what kind of risk are you taking on those accounts, and what is the reward that you're receiving on those accounts, and is the risk and reward on those accounts, are they in line to the type of risk that you're willing to take? You also need to take a look at your IRS tax buckets. Do you have all your money in the taxable bucket, tax deferred bucket, or the tax-free bucket. I would argue that 99% of you have the vast majority of your retirement assets in your taxable bucket and your tax deferred bucket. Very few of you have done a really, really good job in the tax-free bucket. So now, how do you provide and how do you create bucket efficiency between the taxable, tax deferred, and tax-free? And what are the tools that you need to use in order to get there? How are you going to be segmenting your distribution? Remember, retirement is about distribution. Next week, I'm going to spend some quality time, talking about mountain climbing from a financial standpoint. What happens during the accumulation years, and then once you get to the summit, and that would be the summit of your retirement, coming down on the other side of the mountain, which would be your distribution year that some of you may be in right now. How do those rules of engagement totally change? But you need to do a complete overhaul on your financial assets. And you need to talk to someone who's a retirement strategist. Now, that could be me, but if you know someone that you know, like, and trust, feel free to have a discussion with them. The other thing that you need to do is, as you're getting closer and closer to retirement, you need to put together a tactical retirement blueprint. And that's something that we do. But perhaps someone else may be able to do it for you. Now, as far as the type of practice that I run, I run my practice from a tax planning perspective because I do accounting work, and I also do tax planning and retirement distribution planning. So that's my forte. Normally, I deal with people that are either in retirement or they're 5 to 10 years away from retirement. Usually, that is a market that I specialize in because my goal is not to be all things to all people, but to be some things to some people. So you really need to start thinking about, these losses that you have had today and that you are going through and experiencing today in many different ways may be a blessing in disguise. But let me warn you that most of you are not thinking about the following. See, now the Congress is about to approve a $2 trillion package. And there's another one coming down in a few days. So the whole scheme of this is going to be somewhere about $6 trillion. I normally tell my clients that, 1 trillion here, 1 trillion there eventually makes a lot of money. It is a hell of a lot of money for all of us to deal with. But at some point in time in the very near future, someone has got to pay the piper. How is the government going to recover those trillions of dollars that they're putting out now? By the way, they don't have this money. So all they're doing is they're printing money. And when they start printing money, obviously you start to create inflation because the value of those dollars that you have today are going to be a lot less. They're going to be worth a lot less, in 6 months from now, 8 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. So number one, you got to start thinking from a taxable standpoint. If they're going to start raising taxes, for those of you that may not know this, and we'll spend time doing these webcasts, I do a lot of tax planning, so I do tax forward planning. Many of you have never done a tax forward planning report for yourself or your family. If you haven't, I encourage you to do it, but you need to talk to someone that does tax planning. But think of it this way, there's only a 6-year window left in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was signed into law by President Trump in December of 2017 to take effect in January of 2018. So I know that most of you didn't do a good job in 2018 and 2019, so you already lost 2 of those years. But now you still have 2020, and then through December 31st of 2025, we'll still have that law in place. So when we all wake up January 1 of 2026, the rules of engagement are going to be totally different. We're going to go back to the old law where the taxes were higher. And most important, because of the fact that we don't know who's going to be in power at that point in time, taxes more than likely are going to have to double, or this country is going to go bankrupt. And my question to you is, if you have retirement accounts like 401ks, IRAs, if you have drop account, if you happen to be a public safety employee, or if you happen to be a public employee with either drop or you have TSP, you really have no idea how much money you have in that account, because your account value may be $500,000, but you really don't know what percentage of that actually belongs to you, because always remember that what belongs to the IRS always belongs to the IRS. I think I'm going to finish this first show today. Hopefully you have enjoyed some of the stuff that I have discussed. Again, I'm going to be live every single Wednesday. For those of you that may want to reach out to me, feel free to call me. You can call me at area code 786-766-1042. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I would appreciate if you are watching, if you can share, if you can make some comments. I would love for you to do that, because I like to give value back to each and every one of you. For those of you that want to send me an email, feel free to do so. You can email me at Bert, B-E-R-T, at gablestaxgroup.com. And always remember that my goal with each and every one of you is to kind of help you change the way that you see things, because when you change the way that you see things, the things that you see change. So again, guys, thanks very much for listening to me and paying attention. I can't wait to talk to you again next week. And remember, next week we're going to devote some quality time to the mountain analogy of retirement. So until then, I wish you luck. Stay healthy, stay hydrated, keep your distance. And for some of you, keep your distance away from the refrigerator as well. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.